My name is Rob. I'm an alcoholic. I have experience with this step with the help of God. Big Book Step Study sponsor. I'm a member of the Big Book Step Study group, the Path to Recovery of Alcoholics Anonymous, that meets on Sunday nights in Marlboro. I'm in the process of making amends, and I try to practice 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis. I want to thank Kathy for asking me to come out here and speak. My sobriety date is October 2nd of 2005, so earlier this week I just celebrated 12 years. Before I got sober, I couldn't get 12 minutes, let alone 12 years, you know. I learned a lot of stuff about resentments in my life, you know. I'm originally from Southie, so if you know anything about South Boston, all right, growing up there, at least all the way up until the mid-90s, that everything out of South Boston was like an outside world. And if you came into that area, you were an outsider, and we didn't like you. And when you came back, when you came to St. Patrick's Day Parade, you most likely got beat up if you were an outsider, you know. So from a young age, I learned that I didn't like anybody that wasn't from Southie. You know, I really was closed-minded. Up until I got sober, I really had this idea in my head that if you weren't from South Boston, Charlestown, or East Boston, I really didn't want to talk to you. You know what I mean? Because you don't know nothing. And like most of us, we pick up alcohol at a very young age. My first introduction to Alcoholics Anonymous was in 1986. I ended up in a state prison as a result of drinking, you know. And I went to a meeting in there, and there was this guy that was standing up the podium, and I always refer to this because it applies to my recovery today. So recovery is what you put into it is what you get out of it, you know. And over 30 years later, I remember that statement. You know, it took me almost 20 to listen to it. You know, when I look back over my drinking, you know, anytime I ever went to Alcoholics Anonymous is because I was in trouble. I was in a jam. I was on probation. I was on parole. I never did anything anybody ever suggested me to do. I used to listen to this guy in Southie all the time. He used to always say that the only suggestions that you pay for are the ones that you don't take. And I could really understand that statement today, because for about 25 years of coming in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous, a lot of people gave me a lot of good suggestions, and I didn't take any of them. You know, and I'm willing to bet that I paid for most of them too. You know, I would go into meetings, or I would go into a detox, or I'd go into jail, and they'd say, "Why don't you go to Alcoholics Anonymous?" What do I want to go to Alcoholics Anonymous for? They're going to talk about drinking. I'm going to want to drink. You know, and that was the lie that I would tell myself. You know, and that would stop me from going. Or I would just go and be one of those people that sat in the back and literally said to the person up here. I remember being in ACCA one time and literally being in the rehab and literally sitting in the back while a commitment came in, and literally was that person that literally stood up and said to the commitment, "I wish you'd just shut the F up." You know what I mean? Of course, I left that detox and I went out, I started drinking, I went back to prison again, you know. And no God in my life. Not a religious person, never believed in a God of my understanding until I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. The only time I was willing to believe was when I was in his jam, the 911 God, please help me, can I get a bail? Can I get a break this time? It never worked, and they always put me away. And at the end, I became homeless. I went into ACCA Hospital one time. The last time I was in there, and they basically told me that there's two places we can send you. We can send you to Fitchburg Shelter, we can send you to Marlboro. I said, "You can send me to Marlboro because I don't know anybody in Marlboro." I need to say that at the end of my drinking and doing other things, I did not have one single person in my life that I could have called for ask for help, because I pushed every single person away from me or I stole from them. You know, I had this idea. This is an original alcoholic idea. All right, if I could just get everybody out of my life, I'll be doing okay. That's the way that I used to think. And you know what? When I got everybody out of my life, I was not a happy person. I mean, I had an emotional bottom. If you don't know what an emotional bottom is, I couldn't stop drinking, but when I drank, I wasn't getting drunk, I wasn't getting high. It would stop my sickness, my physical sickness, but that emotional pain that I had felt inside, I can remember literally crying every single night, saying, "God, please don't let me wake up," because I knew what I was going to have to do when I woke up. You know, and like I said, I went to ACCA Hospital, ended up in a Marlboro shelter, and my journey started from there. We're talking about resentments, but I came into Alcoholics Anonymous for my first 4.5 years of recovery. I know today that I had untreated alcoholism because I didn't stop any of my behaviors. You know, for the first 4.5 years, I was still lying, cheating, I was stealing, I was sleeping with people's wives. You know what I mean? And people would come up to me and say, you need to stop doing what you're doing. And my answer to them was, you need to mind your own business, and if you've got a problem with that, we can take it outside and straighten it out. You know, that's really the attitude that I had. And I was a very angry person. Anybody who's ever been in a joint before, we like to come in and we go sit in the corner, nobody can be behind us. You know, and that's the way I sat. I sat in the corner just like this. And if you looked at me the wrong way, I was going to say something to you. I can remember being early in recovery, and I went out. I always refer to this. It's funny to me today. I went out. I bought this white T-shirt, and on the front of it, in big, bright red letters, it says, "I don't discriminate. I hate everyone." And I walked around Alcoholics Anonymous with that shirt on. And my first sponsor said, "You need to take that shirt off." Needless to say, I took the shirt off, and he went on my resentment list. But I didn't know, you know what I mean? I didn't know anything, you know. So at 4.5 years clean and sober, I know today that my behaviors started to become unacceptable to me. I didn't like the way I felt. I got involved in the Step 2 AWOLs. I did a little bit of work, left out those worst items in stock like the fifth step talks about. And I had just finished my 4th AWOL, and I went to a Big Book Step study in Bolton. It was the first one that I ever went to. You know, and people after the meeting raised their hand and asked if they sponsor people. And the guy that I asked to be my sponsor happened to be the same person. I go to open speaker meeting with him for years. You know, I went right up and I asked him to sponsor me. You know, I know today that I was ready to do this work. I didn't know it then. I know it now. You know, and my sponsor started to read to me. He read the first 63 pages of this book to me. You know, he pointed out things to me. You know, and when I started to read this book started to come alive to me. It was completely different from reading it before. It's just like a story. But when somebody reads it to you and shows you things, it starts to come alive. I know that when I picked up the first drink, it triggered the allergy that I have to it. Set off this phenomenal craving, obsession, and compulsion. You know, and then I needed something that's outside of myself, because running on Rob put me in prison for years. Running on Rob made me do things I never thought I'd ever do. You know, so I needed something that wasn't me. And that was difficult for me because I never believed in a God of my understanding. But early on in my recovery, that obsession to drink was lifted from me because I was willing to believe that somebody else believed. You know, and I got on my knees probably for the first time in my life in a shelter in a 10-man room. You know, and of course I got fear of people's opinions. I don't want people to see me get on my knees, so I'd wait for everybody to go to bed. I'd wait for everybody to get out of the room. I just get on my knees and say, please remove the thought, the obsession, desire for a drink or drug to live for me. And I don't know, it was about 60 or 90 days sober, but I remember the day I woke up and I wasn't thinking about drinking. I'm 49 years old. I've been thinking about drinking since I was 12. Since the moment I picked it up, I couldn't stop thinking about it. That's all I wanted to do, you know. And I know today I had a spiritual experience at that point. And so when I did my 3rd step with my sponsor, and at the end of the reading of the 3rd step, it says, though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of ourselves of things that are blocking us. Our liquor is but a symptom. It tells me that I'm immediately going to start writing the 4th step the moment I get off my knees. I'm not going to wait till tomorrow. I'm not going to wait till next week. You know, I literally had a book with my sponsor. After I did my 3rd step with my sponsor, I started out writing resentments out. And I used to have people say that they had trouble writing resentments. Like within 2 days, I had like 200 names. You know, I mean, I just couldn't stand most people. I know a lot of it was directed at self. You know what I mean? But I couldn't stand like a lot of people. And my directions were pretty simple. Just write names. Continue to write names. If you don't know that person's name and you know the situation, like this lawyer, this judge, that person at Dunkin' Donuts, just write out the situation, you know? And when you go to meetings, carry a little piece of paper with you, because when people talk, sometimes it triggers stuff in your mind, right? And I would do that, and I would write people's names down, because it would trigger something of a situation that I had in my life that I was pissed off at somebody. And so my sponsor says, when you start getting to the point where you're resentful at Tom Brady, maybe you're done writing names. You know? So when I was done writing names, this book gives specific directions on what to do, basically. I'm going to write out causes. I'm going to write out effects. This is not a story. Keep it under 10 words or less, or directly right to the point. You know what I mean? And I'll write the causes out and what it affected. Self-esteem, insecurity, I was told to bracket fear along that, which I didn't know what it meant at that time. Emotional security, ambitions, pocketbook. I really didn't know what it meant. So when I'm getting all this stuff down on paper, because we hurt the people with the same last name the most, I have multiple resentments against the people in my family, my mother, my brother, my sister. I have my father on my list, and I've never seen my father in my life. I've never met my father in my life, but he was on my resentment list because he left my mother when I was like 1 or 2 years old. I never had a father figure in my life, and I was also instructed to add myself to that list. Alcoholics are very good at beating themselves up. You know what I mean? We get mad at ourselves. I can remember always, when I was drinking or doing other things for years, when I would look in the mirror, I would punch the mirror. I would smash the mirror because I couldn't stand what I was looking at. And it's taken me a long time to like the person that when I look in the mirror, man. Seriously, it has taken a long time. So I got all those names down on paper. I had over 500 resentments. That's what I had. People, places, and things. First I did the people, then I did the places, institutions, and principles. And like I said, I was doing the cause and effects. And now it's going to get to the point where I need to look at what my part in this situation is. Now, if I think about that today, when I'm literally just writing that section, it's like I don't have a part in any of this. They're the ones that did this to me. This is why I'm pissed off. And I need to look at what my part in that situation is. Where am I selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and afraid? What does selfish mean? It basically means, what do I want? And usually when people don't do what I want them to do or what I think they should do, I get pissed off at them. You know what I mean? And dishonesty is not just a cash-registered dishonesty. It's what lies am I telling myself? You know what I mean? That self-seeking behavior is, what did I do to keep that resentment going? You know what I mean? What did I do to get a reaction? And anyone's doing this work, we know all about fear, because self-centered fear, which is at the core of this disease, And what are the top 3 fears that we have? It's not getting what we want, losing what we have, and other people's opinions. The other people's opinions thing was always huge for me for whatever reason. When I grew up poor, a little kid, my mother used to go to Favor, if you're old enough to remember what Favor is, and buy Olympian sneakers and buy the cheap sneakers, and all the kids that had money had better sneakers than us. So when I got older and I started stealing and robbing people's houses and getting money, of course I had to have the best sneakers and stuff like that. You know what? Today I buy a $40 pair of sneakers. I'll buy a $30 pair of pants because, you know what? I'm not worried about what other people think of me today. You know what I mean? And that's the difference as a result of literally doing this work. And as I was writing out my resentments, I literally had a spiritual experience because I could feel these resentments being removed from me as I was writing them out. A couple of things that I've come to learn. One of them is it's better to be a resentment than to be resentful, if you can understand what that means. You know what I mean? And page 552 tells us what to do if we're resentful at somebody. Pray for that person. Pray for them for 2 weeks. Wish them everything you'd want for yourself, health, happiness, and stuff like that. Even though you might not mean it at that moment, if you continue to do it, sooner or later you're gonna want that for that person. What I really realized as a result of doing this work and doing this 4th step is how much energy I wasted walking around my whole life being miserable at people. You know what I mean? And this is what my resentments, this is what I used to do. I would be in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, all right, and if somebody said something wrong to me or somebody said something that pissed me off, I would sit in that corner, I would stare at that person, and in my mind, I'm plotting out their murder, all right? I'm thinking in my head which ways that I want to kill you. In my mind, and it would just go over, refill, over and over and over. And because I've done this work, and I can literally immediately look at what my part in that situation today is. What I've learned about doing the resentment part is that I'm the problem, I've always been the problem, and I will always be the problem. And I had a part in just about every single resentment that I ever had in my life, except for when I was sexually abused as a kid. You know what I mean? I may have had a part into it, but I didn't know any different then. I was just a little kid, and I got all this stuff down on paper. you know, and because of this work, when I get upset today, I can tell you the last time I literally really got upset, it was probably when I was doing this writing. I got so upset, and it wasn't against a person. It was against a DVD player. I got so upset that I ripped it out of the wall and stomped it into the floor. And that's literally the last time I really got upset, and that was about 7 years ago, because I've been through this process for the past 7 years. That's the last time I really got really mad. And everybody knows that I work in treatment, and my clients come up to me and say, "Doesn't anything even bother you?" And my answer to them is, maybe if you asked me that question like 8 years ago, we'd probably be fighting right now, you know. But the difference is, as long as I'm spiritually fit, because resentment's the number one offender that destroys more alcoholics than anything else, and from it stems all forms of spiritual disease, and it has the power to kill. So if I'm being resentful against somebody, I'm shutting myself off from the sunlight of the Spirit, which means that I'm not connected to God, and everything is going to bother me, no matter what it is. But if I'm connected to God and I'm spiritually fit, there's not much that's going to happen to me that's going to bother me, you know. And that's huge to me, because my whole life I was just a reactor. Today I delay. More often than not, I delay. When I get upset, I need to think about what my part in that situation is. And as a result of doing this work, I can do that. And today I don't walk around with the weight of the world on my shoulders anymore. You know what I mean? I become free. You know, it's so nice to wake up and say, I'm grateful to be alive, compared to, fuck, this is another day of hell that's coming on. You know what I mean? Anyways, if you're checking out this work, this is Alcoholics Anonymous. This is where the solution is. This is where I found the solution. If you're writing, keep writing. If you're supposed to be writing, start getting to write. And I'll steal Denise's line. Keep moving forward, because we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
All right.